So we've been looking at turtles, and there's some pretty simple things you can do with it. You can start creating things without having to really do a lot of hard thinking. But that being said, that doesn't mean that turtles are limited to only doing simple things. You can do some pretty complex stuff with turtles as well. I would say one of the more interesting things that you can do with turtles that can become very high level is fractals. Now, if you look up fractals online, there are some pretty intense stuff. If we go to images, for example, some of this can get really, really crazy. But it doesn't always have to. There are some simpler diagrams that you can find, although even some of these can still be very complex to try to create. But a fractal doesn't have to be super complex. The main idea of a fractal is that the smaller parts are representative of like the larger part. It starts to look like itself. And so if we go back to like something like this, you can see that some of these aren't as complex as others. Like granted, some of these like snowflakes ideas are pretty complex, but just breaking this up into smaller and smaller squares isn't that hard, or smaller and smaller triangles isn't that hard, at least to wrap your head around. However, now when it comes to programming, what may not be visually very difficult could be rather difficult to do with actual code. So we're going to create a few fractals over a few videos, but we're going to start simple. So instead of doing something super complex, we're going to do something much easier. And you might say, well, that doesn't look that much like a fractal, but it still is. It's just extremely simplified. What we're going to start with is basically just reusing some different line segments. And one of the ways that helps me think about this is to look at a math term. So if you're familiar with factorials, that's where, let's say you have 5 factorial, right? That's where you have 5 times 4 times 3 times 2 times 1, right? But writing that is the same thing as also writing 5 times 4 factorial. So this itself is a fractal, and of course we could redefine that as 4 times 3 factorial, right? So each one of these has something that resembles itself inside of that same equation. So this is like a fractal type of math pattern. So keeping with that idea and just being very simple, we're going to make our first fractal. So let's say we start with a straight line, right? And let's pretend that this is 5 units long, whatever unit we decide. And then maybe we make a shorter line that's maybe 4 units long. That might not be quite long enough, but we'll just pretend. I'm just eyeballing it. And then maybe we have one that's about 3 units long, about halfway through. Oh, I should have measured this better, right? So something around there-ish. And then we have one that's about 2 units long, and then we have one that's just about 1 unit long. And so this is a fractal, and this shouldn't be too hard to program. So that's what we're going to try first.